from Old South Meeting House. It was supposed to be live, but we can't have nice things. It's Tea Party Tonight with Rob Crean. Presented by Revolutionary Spaces. With special guests, historians Jane Kamensky and Mary Beth Norton. Comedians Bethany Van Delft and Kathe Farris. And now, your host, Rob Crean.
Hey, welcome to Tea Party Tonight here at Revolutionary Spaces. I am your host, Rob Crean. Thanks so much for being here. And 18th century students' school notebooks were discovered at Mass Historical Society. Scholars learned that the Revolutionary-era student thought homework was boring, disliked phonies, and based on an inscription on the cover, believed that Mozart rules. Historic New England is celebrating the holidays at its sites, including a Victorian Christmas at the late 19th century Eustace House estate, decorated with bright lights and bows, filling its halls with music and mirth. Here at the Old South Meeting House, we are hosting a Puritan Christmas by not talking about it at all. This year, the Old North Church is encouraging pet owners to bring their furry ones to a blessing of the animals, which is a troubling way of learning, no, not all dogs go to heaven. It's that time of year again when the old debate arises, where was the song Jingle Bells actually written? Local town Medford, Massachusetts claims it was written there, while Savannah, Georgia claims the same. We may never know, but one thing we can all agree on is it was definitely first performed at a minstrel show. Oh, no image for that one. Good call, Stephen. 400 years following the first Thanksgiving, the Wampanoag tribe have expressed regrets about helping the Pilgrims. When asked, one tribe elder said, "We told them they could crash with us until they got their act together, but I guess that never happened." A teacher at a Florida college is in trouble because his class description, Critical Studies in Race, Ethnicity, and Cultural Specialization, features the words critical and race too close together. I personally was shocked when I heard this news, that Florida had a college. In 1783, founding father John Jay brought an enslaved woman named Abigail with him to negotiate the Treaty of Paris. Bringing an enslaved person across the ocean to negotiate the freedom of a new country would be like if Greta Thunberg's boat had sails made out of endangered Bengal tigers and she was rowing with oars made out of giant pandas. It's cute, but it's very stupid. Crypto investors attempted to buy a copy of the U.S. Constitution using cryptocurrency. Finally, something has unseated Tesla as the most obnoxious thing to buy with Bitcoin. In December of 1770, Lieutenant Governor Thomas Hutchinson offered a 100-pound reward for information leading to the identity of someone who defaced the doors of the old State House. I don't know, though. I thought the vandalism looked pretty cool. There's a new movie about Benedict Arnold called Benedict Arnold, Hero Betrayed. I haven't finished it yet, but this guy was out there funding the Connecticut militia, capturing Fort Ticonderoga for the Americans, and helping Washington left and right. I'm only halfway through, but I've got a pretty good feeling about this Benedict Arnold guy. Can't wait to see how it ends. We just found out that in 1637, the New English Canon, a book that criticized Puritanism, was the first book formally banned in Massachusetts. Other books that were banned included Are You There, God? It's Me, Mary Dyer, A Puritan's Guide to Getting It On, and the still controversial 50 Shades of White. A monument of Teddy Roosevelt is being moved from New York City to North Dakota, where residents worry that it won't stop complaining about how the pizza's not as good. Massachusetts may soon have an official state dinosaur, but some are concerned the thunder lizard being considered isn't actually native to the region. I mean, yeah, you might have lived in the area, but I was born in Dorchester. I moved to eastern Massachusetts for the majority of my life after that, but I was born in Dot. What's more, this is calling into question the validity of Massachusetts' state cryptid, state wizard, and state Dracula. Massachusetts Supreme Court is set to hear arguments about whether or not Boston City Hall can fly a flag used originally by George Washington, featuring the motto, "Appeal to Heaven." Here at Tea Party Tonight, I think we have come up with a pretty good compromise. They're not just donuts anymore. And finally, artifacts reportedly owned by Paul Revere were just sold at auction for $20,000. $20,000 for a bunch of old stuff? No thanks, I'll keep my money where it's safe, in NFTs. We have a great show for you tonight, folks. Historians Jane Kamensky and Mary Beth Norton are here. A little later, we will be joined by comedians Bethany Van Delft and Kathe Farris, and one of our colleagues, Ed O'Connell, to talk about parenting in early America. It's going to be a great show. We will be right back. Our first guest is the Mary Donlin Alger Professor Emeritus of American History at Cornell University and author of this incredible new book, 1774, The Long Year of Revolution. Please welcome Mary Beth Norton. Thanks so much for being here.
I'm very glad to be here with you.
Your new book, 1774, The Long Year of the Revolution, is in many ways the story of the impact and aftermath of the Boston Tea Party. Why did you think it was important to dig so deep into this year?
It actually came out of work I did long ago on my doctoral dissertation when I worked on the Loyalist exiles who left America during the Revolution. And I realized that 1774 was the crucial year that made Loyalists. And one of the things I discovered is that it also made the term Loyalist. The term appears for the first time during the year 1774. And my argument as to why that happens is that you don't have people who call themselves loyalists or who are called loyalists until you have people who are disloyal.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I mean, we think about there being, people that were ready for revolution, back in like 1760 when the first, the Stamp Act is put into place or whatever. And it's really, people are still kind of like want the colonies to remain part of Great Britain, really up until this is the point where people start to splinter.
Exactly right. I mean, really, everybody's a loyalist, really, in a lot of ways, until well into 1773 and possibly into 1774. It's the events of 1774, I argue in the book and in my other work, that really creates the American Revolution.
Yeah, and so much of it is also the disagreements of people. I at one point in the book, you say pretty much everyone in Boston wanted to repay the money for the tea, but no one could agree on how it should be paid or who should pay for it.
Yes, there was a lot of people thought the money should be repaid, but nobody could figure out how to do it. I mean, do you have wealthy guys come forward and say, we'll volunteer to pay? Or do you tax the town? Do you try to find who did it and try to get them to pay? Do you actually ask the entire colony of Massachusetts to do it? Do you get contributions from all over the colonies? All those issues came up.
And also just the opinions throughout all the colonies of the events of the Boston Tea Party you talk about a lot in this, because at this time there's pretty wide variance throughout the colonies.
There is, but there are very few people who think the Bostonians did the right thing. I mean, one of the things I was surprised to find was that George Washington, in fact, said explicitly, I don't think the Bostonians should have done this. And Benjamin Franklin said the same thing. I mean, Bostonians did not have a lot of support for what they had done in destroying private property, because that's how it was seen, a destruction of private property.
You do talk a lot about the Boston Tea Party, but what are some of the other really significant events that took place during 1774 that you talk about in the book?
Well, I mean, of course, there are, I think the really crucial thing is the reaction in Britain to the Boston Tea Party, or to the destruction of the tea. Of course, it wasn't called the Boston Tea Party at the time. It wasn't called that until 1826, but they all called it the destruction of the tea. But if the British had responded differently, and not with major coercive efforts that we call the coercive acts, I think, in fact, things could have worked out very differently, because what really happened was the response in America to the coercive acts, which led all sorts of people who had been criticizing Boston for destroying the tea to, in fact, fall in line behind Boston.
Yeah, so much of this book seems to be sort of the story of sort of unlawful acts, and then the disproportionate reaction to those acts. What do you think we can learn from that today?
I think what we can learn from it is to beware of disproportionate responses. I mean, I think you're absolutely right in the way you characterize it. I mean, yes, the destruction of the tea in Boston was unlawful, and the destruction of tea that occurred other places was also unlawful. But the British really went overboard in their responses, and they led to everyone being furious, including future loyalists, I might add, who were furious about what the British were doing in some of the coercive acts.
One of the interesting things that I'd never heard before was you talk about how before the Boston Tea Party, Boston was actually the colony that bought the most officially taxed tea.
Yes, it's ironic. It's very ironic. The Bostonians were actually in trouble with New Yorkers and Pennsylvanians who had been carefully boycotting taxed tea, but the Bostonians were buying it like crazy. And so, in fact, one argument has been that the Bostonians felt they had to act to improve their reputation among the other colonists by being very destructive in the way they dealt with the tea. I mean, Philadelphia and New York dealt with the tea very differently. They just turned the ships away. Charleston dealt with it in still another way, where they allowed customs officers to confiscate the tea for lack of paying the duty. But if some people argue that the Bostonians literally went overboard by throwing the tea overboard to improve their reputation among the other colonies.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who lives in Boston and has seen people fight over parking spaces, that definitely is consistent with our character here in the city.
Yeah, I used to live in Boston, so I know what you mean.
Yeah, definitely. It's yeah, we as a citizenship have our own history of disproportionate reactions. You talk about about just a lot of the arguments for the boycott of the tea, and you've obviously written extensively about women in history in this era. I was very interested in a lot of the arguments that were made in the press that were sort of geared towards women.
Yes, I mean, women were the chief consumers, period. That is, it was women who did the shopping in the stores, and the cultural figure, I would say, is of a woman entertaining her friends over tea in the middle of the afternoon, while the men are off at the ale house or in the coffee house or something like that. And women did indeed drink a lot of tea. And so when the colonists decided to boycott tea, one of the things that people did in the newspapers was to write essays, or in pamphlets was to write essays to tell people why they shouldn't drink tea, and particularly to tell women why they shouldn't drink tea. And some of the arguments were laughable, and some women laughed at them. In fact, it wasn't just us who find them laughable. Women who had been drinking tea for years were told, don't drink tea, it will make you sick and will make your children sicker. And you will give birth to these children who will not survive because you're drinking all this tea. And women wrote back in the newspapers and said, that is crazy. We've been drinking tea for years. We think it's very healthful. We like it. And if you want us to stop drinking tea for political reasons, just tell us to stop drinking tea for political reasons.
Yeah, and you talk about women making the argument that, why were these arguments never made that tea will give you a nervous disposition and cause your children to die at a younger age,
Right.
when there wasn't a boycott.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. I mean, women were pretty smart. They knew what was going on, and they basically called out the men and they said, tell us the truth. Don't tell us that it'll make us sick. Just tell us that we need to support the cause, and we'll be much more likely to support the cause.
And as far as you know, there weren't any record back then of children being born with tea-borne powers or anything like that, right?
Oh, not at all. Not at all. In fact, what's really interesting, of course, is that despite all this stuff that was one doctor, in fact, who wrote that. We know one doctor wrote it. Several doctors wrote it. One we can identify.
Mm-hmm.
And despite that, women and men too thought of tea as very healthful. And one of the things that survive is very interesting little strips of paper from Connecticut, where people ask the local committee that is controlling the tea to supply them with tea. I'm sick, my child is sick. The doctor says what we really need is tea. So can you give us some, or can you let us buy some? And the fact that these little tiny pieces of paper, I mean, literally, they're just like this. Little tiny pieces of paper survived all these years is really fun. But to see that people are asking for tea when they think they're sick, and the way that today somebody would ask for a cup of tea if they're feeling poorly.
The book is 1774, The Long Year of Revolution, by Professor Mary Beth Norton. Professor Norton, thank you so much for joining us.
I enjoyed it a lot, and the book is available in paperback from Vintage.
What a great interview with Mary Beth Norton. And now a game with comedians Bethany Van Delft, Kathe Farris, and our own Ed O'Connell.
Parent involvement in education is a hot button issue across the country. Many states are experiencing resistance to history curriculum involving slavery, and Boston just voted in favor of a non-binding resolution to directly elect their school committees, which have been appointed since 1991. Here at Tea Party Tonight, we know it's hard to be a parent, and it's important to be involved in the lives of our children. So we decided to go to some parenting experts with a series of celebrated historical activities and ask them from a parent's perspective what they would say if their kids were involved. In a segment we call Clam Chowder for the Parent Soul. Let's introduce our guests. From the PBS Nova digital series Parental Logic, comedian Bethany Van Delft. And from the Comedy Studio, comedian Kathe Farris. And finally, from the Melrose School Committee and the Revolutionary Spaces Visitor Experience team, Ed O'Connell.
Good evening, Rob.
Since it is the anniversary of the Boston Tea Party, let's say your child went to a community meeting as a spectator. After getting wrapped up in the heat of the moment, they dressed up in a sort of racist costume and go over to the harbor and participate in the destruction of thousands of pounds worth of tea. Now, law enforcement is trying to figure out who is responsible, and the whole town is being punished by the government for your kids' actions. As a parent, what do you do?
First of all, Rob, O'Connells aren't snitches, even colonial O'Connells. I tell the boy, assuming it was the boy and not one of the girls, I would tell the boy to keep his mouth shut and to play his cards right, keep them close to the vest, and live a long life. And should he do those things, he will probably end up being famous as a result of this event. But ultimately, I think the question for the kid is, did you bring any tea home, kid? Is there a bit for your old man? And how does a guy get a decent cuppa?
I would say that due to mine and my children's racial makeup, he probably wouldn't have been invited to that meeting, So we'd probably be far away from that meeting, probably hanging out with our indigenous friends and cousins saying, look at these fools over here. But I do know this, though. I used to walk past the Tea Party Museum with my son all the time, always, There's Fife music playing, which it scared the both of us. He's 3. I mean, being from the Puerto Rican culture, we know that if there's fife and no drums, there's probably trouble ahead. So we would kind of just dash by the museum. But one day he did ask me, he's like, Mom, what happened there? And I realized I know a little bit, and that also could be because of our cultural slant, that we don't know the whole story. But I said, some guys were very upset that their tea was going to be taxed, and they didn't want to spend that money at all because they probably wanted to spend it on slaves or something like that. So they dressed up as native people and then threw all of this tea over the side of the ship. And he goes, but why? And I was like, because they were mad, and that was the way they were going to make change. And he's like, but explain it. And I'm like, you know what? Ask your dad, because his dad did pay attention in school, and he does know exactly what happened.
Well, as in any way that I approach my parenting, it's always picking my battles. So I have to ask myself, what's the good part of this? Did she leave the house? Yes. Did she participate in a group? Yes. Did she make eye contact? Maybe. Did she learn a lesson? Probably not. But you know what? There's more on the winning side of this than the losing side of this for me. And for me, they're just small wins every day with the kids. So that's the way I go about it.
The Pope's Day riot of 1765. In Boston, there's an annual tradition of neighborhoods building floats with kind of offensive effigies of the Pope on them. The groups drag their floats downtown, and then usually they drink and fight all night. It ends with a big bonfire. Your child feels that they are old enough to go, and everyone else in the neighborhood gets to. As a parent, what do you say to your child?
If my child thought that they were ready to do this because they felt they had the physical prowess to engage in these battles, well, I would say fight me. Fight me first. And if you win, or at least take something from me, like get my boot off my foot. If you win, then you can go. And if you don't win, we'll practice until the next one. We'll practice for the year, and we'll see.
Well, this actually sounds like a lot of fun. To me, this is a combination of crafting and cardio. And I can't think of a better thing to be doing. I actually take issue with they saying that these are offensive. Maybe they're not offensive, portraits of the Pope. Maybe they're just awful. Maybe these kids aren't talented at this kind of crafting. That it takes a higher level, because it's on a bigger scale. So I'm with Bethany. I think it's a lot of fun, and I'd fight her kid too.
I would fight neither Bethany nor her child. With regard to Pope's Day, from everything I've read about the Pope's Day people, they truly scare the heck out of me. These people were crazy, they were violent, and they were drunk. So in terms of a child's permission to go, I don't think age is the issue, quite frankly. I think it's, a series of questions. Are you insane enough? My child, are you sturdy enough? Are you swift enough to survive the mayhem that was Pope's Day in colonial Boston? So, with all of that in mind, Rob, I guess I would want to know, just in terms of playing out the scenario, do I have other children that will live to see further days? Can I spare one to this event? Because I think there's a shot that they're not coming home from this.
It seems like Bethany's standard of fight me first is good then. Maybe Ed's kids also have to fight Bethany first to get a chance to participate. In winter of 1774, a sea captain and government official named John Malcolm was tarred and feathered in Boston. Let's say you find out that your child was present and took part in the tarring and feathering. They defend themselves by saying that Malcolm had attacked a nice local businessman and his political views are unpopular. As a parent, what do you say to your child?
Well, I always go with my NMK mode. Not my kid. Deny, deny, deny. But I also know it absolutely did happen. My kids are super susceptible to peer pressure. It's something that we celebrate in our home. So what I would do, because here's the thing, I always say to my kids, listen, don't ever take up murder because you're going to be incarcerated. Why? Because they don't clean up after themselves. They don't cover their tracks. So we're definitely going to be implicated for this. So what I would say is this is just a good example of why we now have to transfer schools and why you should be cleaning up your room.
Yeah, I mean, it strikes me that tarring and feathering must have been an enormously entertaining and exciting spectacle, unless, of course, you're on the receiving end of it. But it also strikes me from a parent perspective that this is probably not the most appropriate way to resolve a dispute. And as Kathe suggested, I think, assault and battery with a dangerous weapon, to wit, a bucket of tar, probably is never a good look. Physically assaulting, injuring, and humiliating someone doesn't seem like the best approach to dispute resolution. So, that's my parental take. I'm always struck in this regard too. Where do these people get their tar and feathers? These items that were readily available on the scene in colonial Boston. Could one go into the colonial equivalent of an Ace Hardware and see your friendly Ace Hardware man and say, can you direct me to the aisle with the tar and or the feathers?
Knowing my children to be of peaceful and empathetic natures, I would wonder if there's something about this event that my child is projecting their unspoken self. I would sit down and say, are you feeling like you want to wear tar and feathers? Like, is this your grand expression of yourself? Is that why you're doing this to someone else? Be yourself, embrace who you are. If you wanna wear tar and feathers, my friend, let's go get you some tar and feathers, okay? Well, and I would take them down to the general store. I'd bring them to the tar aisle, and I'd let them pick out the most glamorous, glorious peacock feathers I could ever imagine. And then we would go and we'd have a little family celebration, and we'd tar and feather my children.
That's really
I
great.
like how Bethany's keeping it in-house.
Yeah.
Everything's in-house. They're gonna fight her, they're gonna tar and feather.
Yeah, because we're afraid of being outside of the house in the 1700s. Like, we don't want to be out there. No.
Yeah.
That's true.
Makes a lot of sense. The first elephant to visit the United States was Old Bet, who arrived in 1796 and visited New York, Boston, and Salem. It is widely believed that that same elephant met its end when it was shot to death by an old man in Maine who was jealous of the attention the elephant was getting. Let's say this old man is your father-in-law. You have to explain to your kids why Grandpa killed Dumbo because he was jealous of Dumbo.
I would say, I'm so sorry, my darling children, but your papa died. We're not going to see him anymore. He's gone, and let's just stick with the good memories we have of him. He's gone. Sorry.
I'm gonna go back to the third scenario with the tar and feather. And not only would I deny it and transfer schools, in the summer, they'd have to spend summers with Pop Pop in Maine.
Having been raised in an Irish Catholic household here in Massachusetts, the killing of Old Bet would be in that category of stories that was never discussed, that long legacy of misdeeds that simply wouldn't be brought up. And when it was, whoever brought it up would be met with a cold, hard stare, followed by a diversion or misdirection to a more benign topic, say money, politics, or religion.
This has been so great. I want to thank Bethany Van Delft, Kathe Farris, and Ed O'Connell for joining me. This has been Clam Chowder for the Parent Soul. We'll be right back.
Our next guest is the Jonathan Trumbull Professor of American History at Harvard University and the author of a number of books, including Revolution in Color, The World of John Singleton Copley. Please welcome Professor Jane Kamensky. Thanks so much for being with
Rob.
us. Hi,
Thanks for having me.
So your most recent book is about John Singleton Copley, and he is best known for his portraits of a lot of revolutionary people, especially here in Boston, like Paul Revere and Samuel Adams. Yet he ends up being a loyalist. How did a person who ended up being a loyalist become the sort of official portrait painter of the revolution?
It's a great question, Rob. And I think one of the things I loved about working on Copley's life is he helps complicate both the idea of the revolutionaries and the loyalists. So the first thing I would say is, at the point when he painted Hancock and Mercy Otis Warren in the early and mid 1760s, they weren't revolutionaries. They were just people who wanted to portray their status on canvas. When he painted Sam Adams in 1768, he's a kind of proto-revolutionary. He's certainly an insurrectionist, but there's not a party yet. And to the extent that there is a party, Copley's part of it. He's a kind of soft liberty man. But like a lot of people who depend on trade and custom, he has clients from many sides. He paints General Gage the same week that he paints Sam Adams. And so he's listening and learning and preserving his neutrality. The short answer to the way he becomes a loyalist is he marries it. He does very well in his marriage, as people like Copley tried to do, right? People who were born to nothing and wanted more. Copley marries the daughter of one of the richest merchants in town, Richard Clark, who sold a number of English and India's goods, including tea. And it's the accident that Richard Clark's son was one of the consignees of East India Company tea bound for Boston in the summer and fall of 1773 that really gets Copley off the fence just before the fence gets turned down, pulled down for firewood.
Well, and speaking of tea, in researching loyalists, do you have any thoughts on the Tea Party and the course of acts and how and the things that followed from sort of a loyalist point of view?
I think it's really important to remember that all of the sort of great acts of rebel energy in the run-up to the revolution have another side to them, right? That it's not a sort of outpouring of everybody in Boston, but rather a political insurgency that has some natural ebb and flow, and that's also mobilized by people who have sort of organizing energy and political energy. So I guess the first thing I would say about the Tea Party is it's very quiet through the summer of 1773 as the act is passed and the licenses go out. Nobody really is anticipating that they're going to be able to turn that piece of legislation and the arrival of those cargoes into a kind of decisive political moment in Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. So people like Copley and his father-in-law are feeling pretty great about having been lucky enough to be in the family network that snags one of those licenses. When push comes to shove, and it really does come to shove in November and December of 1773, it's terrifying to be in the party of the tea and to be a friend of government as the insurgency mobilizes the town around the tea. Literally terrifying. Clark is an old man. He's afraid for his life. He and his sons wind up, as so many people have before, fleeing to Castle William and seeking, refuge in that sort of carceral encampment in the harbor. They're literally afraid of mob violence that has already threatened their property and that will certainly threaten their lives.
You talk about how the Tea Party was really kind of a decisive moment there, but there had been lots of destruction of property before this. What about the Tea Party made it different, made it a turning point?
So, I think through Copley's eyes, the Tea Party being a turning point is purely familial, right? It's purely about the violence that's visited against his family, about the fact that it becomes impossible for people who won't denounce that commodity and that cargo literally to walk the streets of the town. From the insurgency's perspective, I think it's really hard to see. Ideologically, there's nothing especially distinctive about those cargoes of tea. tea itself, as you know, has been a sort of freighted symbol for a number of years before the Tea Party. The Townsend Acts enumerated tea in 1765. It's boycotted against, and non-importation is organized against tea and other commodities. But the hotness, and as you said, the decisiveness, what the loyalist Peter Oliver says, the Rubicon of the Tea Party, is really hard to understand. I think it's made by the temperature of the crowd, by the directness of the Crown's ownership of that property through the East India Company, so that it's an act against Crown property, and maybe most of all by Parliament's reaction, right? Had Parliament reacted and said, okay, pay it back, we're going to give you 5 years, here's the payment schedule, instead of by closing the harbor, declaring martial law, suspending the charter, I think it could have passed as a sort of stone in the revolutionary road, in the way that the occupation of the troops in 1768 passed, until the explosion of violence in March of 1770. And even that passed, after the trials of the soldiers in the massacre.
Would you say that you are sympathetic with the loyalists? I mean, in a lot of ways, it kind of seems like they're just trying to follow the rules.
I think that's a trick question, Rob. Surely we would all have been patriots. I mean, this is a question I ask students, right? Who would you have been in 1776? And almost everybody, believes in what unites us as a people and says they would have been a liberty man or woman. I think when we look at these folks on the ground, people who had something to lose had a lot of reason to fear and to cling to order. I'm a very orderly person. Maybe you can see it from my office, right? So I do sympathize with what it would have been like to have the mob come to your door, and whether that would have been a strategy that would have made me say, oh yeah, I want to join that party. Their ideas are really good. Looking backwards, the Liberty men and women are bolder, right? More daring, more adventurous, more able to picture something new in the face of the world, in the way that Tom Paine articulates it in early 1776. In the fall of 1773, they might have seemed just like a bunch of brick throwing idiots to me.
Do you think that the revolution was inevitable? And do you think that that anyone went too far?
It's a really good question. So as a historian, I believe, as a sort of core of my professional identity, that nothing is inevitable, right? That people make choices, and those choices aggregate in unpredictable ways. A student in my class said yesterday, one of the things that they had learned in our semester-long study of the American Revolution is that people are continually deciding, that it's not a sort of binary on-off. We do know that, by 1750, maybe even before, the colonies had developed quite distinctly in their social forms, in the priority that they gave to representative government, in the lower houses in most of the provinces, in their demography, right? Their huge, rapid increase of population, doubling every generation. Franklin points this out as a distinctive feature of the colonial population in 1751. So there is a kind of engine of difference between the provinces and the metropolis. And the thing that I find most persuasive about an inevitability argument is the sheer distance, right? It is not the Paine claim that a continent can't be governed by an island. Clearly that's ridiculous. But it's very hard to govern from not just 3,000 plus miles away, but from 4 months away when you think about a completed circuit of information. So it's I think once things go wrong in the relationship between colonies and metropole, it's very, very hard to course correct when you pose a plea or ask a question to your leaders in January, and then you get a very timely answer back in May, by which time things have really changed on the ground where you are, and maybe the ministry's risen and fallen overseas. So that once a dialogue is needed, it's impossible to have it in real time. And it's hard for us to grasp that, right? Like when we're on technologies like this, and if you don't like how I'm talking, you can chat me. And if I don't answer my chat, you can Slack me. We live in a very synchronous world. I think the asynchronicity of the empire is a huge explanatory factor, especially at a moment like this.
The book is called A Revolution in Color, The World of John Singleton Copley. Thank you for joining us, Professor Jane Kamensky.
Thanks, Rob. It was a pleasure to be with you.
And now we've got a segment from our own Kendra Dawsey. Have you ever thought that maybe the American flag isn't the best designed flag? Well, you definitely will after you watch this next segment. It's called Flag Burns.
Day after day, millions of Americans look up to the flag. But our old glory isn't so glorious. And I'm not talking about what the flag represents, a deeply troubled nation at the forefront of modern-day colonialism, but what the flag actually looks like. It looks bad. It looks like a failed art project. It looks like a boomer meme that you'd find on Facebook. And we, as Americans, need to face the ugliness of our flag. It is simply bad graphic design. Now, I've seen a lot of flags in my day, and I once dated a girl who took a graphic design class online. So I think it's safe to say that I've done my own research, and I should be considered an expert. I went to Yale. First of all, the red, white, and blue color scheme is just tired. The Netherlands have done it, Russia's done it, hell, even Britain's done it. You would think as a new nation trying to show that we're separate from our mother country, we'd do something more interesting for our first national flag. Like, make it dark to represent our brooding goth phase. When Mexico created its flag, they incorporated a symbolism from an indigenous creation story. There's an eagle sitting on a cactus devouring a serpent to represent the founding of the Aztec city of Tenochtitlan, which is now the center of Mexico City. America's flag doesn't have any of that. Ignoring the history of indigenous groups is common in the US, and it results in bad aesthetics. If we aren't going to utilize the tons of cool indigenous visuals we have, then why didn't America at least borrow from one of its own Eurocentric creation myths, like Christopher Columbus being a Spaniard who's good at finding things? As a visual foil to the Star-Spangled Bummer, let's take a look at the flag of the O'odham Nation. See? It has complementary colors. It incorporates specific cultural motifs. The American flag just evokes a sunburnt man wearing only a denim vest. Stars and stripes make appearances on national flags all over the world. They don't represent anything intrinsic or unique to this nation. I want cultural prestige. I want finesse. I want a dragon. Stars to represent states was a good idea when there were 13, but 50 is just too busy. And what's the plan for when we finally let Puerto Rico and DC have statehood, or when we inevitably annex Canada? Hell, what if we get Greenland like Trump wanted? And let's talk about these stripes. America was a sleek, slim coast when we started out, and everyone wanted to get with the new, hot, young republic on the block, but as we got older, we became a wide-ass continent. Nobody looks good in horizontal stripes, but on this nation shape, not flattering. And some of these stripes are shorter than others, which implies that some states are lesser than others. And I think we know which ones. Even though I am incredibly attractive, talented, hip, and fashionable, I still don't have all the answers here. But it is my birthright as an American to complain about a problem without offering a solution. I'm just saying, we're in a period of significant change in this country, and most of the flag redesigns so far have actually made it worse. I figure it's worth a shot giving some helpful tips. Back to you, Rob.
Thanks, Kendra. We're definitely going to get letters about that one, right? I think we could all use a drink. So I got some of our writers together to make a colonial-era beverage called Whistle Belly Vengeance. How do you think that went?
All right, welcome everybody back to the Tea Party Tonight session. We're making another fantastic, that is to say, disgusting but historical cocktail, Whistle Belly Vengeance. That basically is a way to say that this is just going to ruin your guts. Whistle belly is an old term, the gastrointestinal results of drinking really bad and expensive liquor that got ported over to this particular drink.
When you hear whistle belly, what do you think?
An old blues musician.
Polite way of not saying that this is going to give you the RIA something awful.
You got a whistle belly? Is that what you got? You got a whistle in your belly? You got a whistle belly?
I didn't realize the drink was called Whistle Belly. I have stuff to do after this, but I will try my best.
If you're not satisfied with Whistle Belly, then the alternative names are also the Whip Belly Vengeance or the Pinch Gut Vengeance. So you can really take your pick.
I like the pinched gut. That sounds like something Gwyneth Paltrow would.
Why did people drink this in the first place?
These Puritans up there, they really hate to waste anything and take what God gives us, Protestant work ethic, all that sort of stuff. So the main ingredients here are sour beer, molasses, and breadcrumbs. And when we think about sour beer today, it's like a thing that you pay a premium for, a lambic or a Belgian ale or something like that. Here, it really just means like old, nasty beer. Back in the day, if your house was big enough, you automatically were a home brewer. You just made most of your stuff. So all these families are making beer at home. Sometimes the batch goes bad, they can't drink it in time, whatever. And you're left with beer that's kind of skunky, kind of funky. They'll be damned if they're going to throw it away. So this is a way to sort of save it by making it a little bit more palatable and throwing some body in it so you can call it a meal and pretend you're not an alcoholic.
Why did they drink the Whistle Belly Vengeance? People seek vengeance for one reason, and that is justice.
I do want to live in a universe where God does not want us to waste nasty beer.
Let's break down our ingredients.
I went with a Unicorn Farts, which is a premium beer.
I'm using a Rodenbach Classic, crafted and brewed in Belgium. So apparently the way it's made in Belgium is that they have huge, very wide, but not deep vats of the beer. And then they open the windows and have a log with the yeast and bacteria that is needed to make this beer. And the wind just blows that yeast and bacteria into the beer from the log. The man at Kathy's explained it to me. It might be too fancy for this drink.
That's great. I went to a Reliable Market in Union Square, Somerville, right near Vera's, where the Comedy Studio is doing their winter residency. And I talked to Paul there, who was very helpful. And he suggested this one right here. It's called Alien Observer from Foam Brewers in Vermont.
I'm currently on the West Coast. I don't drink beer because of the high gluten content. So I'm making a gluten-free West Coast version, being from Southern California. We're using tequila Paloma from Cutwater because grapefruit juice is sour. Why not tequila?
It's so funny how every time you show something, it like blurs out as though, like as if
it's like my drink.
Because when you're in LA, Zoom won't show anything until it's cleared.
Yeah.
This drink was popular in the British Isles and colonial America, specifically the Northeast. That's because the British had the sugar islands, right? So they had easy access to a lot of sugarcane, triangle trade. We won't go over it. I'm sure you all remember third grade, but yeah. I mean, we're talking about American history. You're not going to get very far without hitting slavery at some point. Literally, the brand of my molasses is plantation molasses. So, yeah.
Yours looks like it came straight off.
It really does.
The actual plantation.
Yeah, I don't know.
Mine is called Grandma's Molasses. Nothing wrong with this molasses. No unsavory history. Just good old-fashioned fun.
I didn't have molasses, so I got honey.
Oh, God.
Which is... because it's doing something very sexual, right?
What is that bear doing?
It's a literal honey bear.
Basically, the molasses is what's allowing you to drink this, because otherwise it would be near rancid. So, back in the day, you're doing this, you have molasses available, it's a sweetener. And then the last part is going to be breadcrumbs, preferably brown. For me, I just took 3 slices of wheat bread, put them in the oven at 425 for about 5 minutes. They came out pretty crispy, mashed them up. Now I have breadcrumbs.
I went to a birthday party the other day where my friend was making bread from the Levant, from the Middle East, and she accidentally burnt it. So I took it and I'm crushing that now. It was either this or panko breadcrumb.
That's Puritan industry right there. This whole drink is about wasting nothing and using every little scrap that you can get.
And I have the panko.
It's corn chips.
Oh my God.
They're gluten-free. They're already crunchy. And I can just crush them in my hand.
It's like the California Pizza Kitchen version of like this drink. I love it. I saw a recipe from back in the day that was a gallon of weak or sour beer, a quart of molasses, and a dried quart of breadcrumbs. So that's basically 1 part beer to a quarter part molasses to a quarter part breadcrumbs. So whatever that is for you, you just want to get that beer to a nice little steam simmer. And once that's at that rate, you can just go ahead and drop in everything else, stir it up. I'd say probably let it cook for another 15, 20 seconds, and then you should be ready to serve. I'm about to do that myself. Right now, I'm adding my molasses to my hot beer, which is a phrase that I never thought I'd say in my life.
That sounds like a sexual euphemism, honestly. I don't even know what, but this is a lot of molasses. I'm not going to drink all of this. Oh my God.
But I mean, as nasty as it sounds, of all of this, I think the molasses is your friend here. Like, it's really going to make this somewhat drinkable.
If you say so.
What if it's good because you have like a premium beer?
It's a very important point. Like, yeah, no matter what this tastes like, you have to remember that it was 10 times worse back in the 1700s.
That's a motto for New England. No matter what it's like, it was 10 times worse.
The problem with mine is that it's clear, so you can see all the things.
Oh.
Nick, get this out. No one wants to see that.
Oh my goodness, it's so foul that it's been blurred out for our protection.
Oh, this drink is rated R, baby.
Breadcrumbs floating in a highly viscous liquid that's brown makes this look like awfulness. Honestly, what's making this easier for me to drink is knowing that it's not actually the result of a whistle belly.
Should have gone with panko.
This is basically a meal replacement. Certain levels of beer, obviously, the more solids they have in them, if you're home brewing and stuff like that, is basically just half-finished bread with a little booze in it. You're really just trying to get calories out of, and this is like a breakfast.
Yeah, this was back at the time where like calories were difficult to come by.
Yeah.
My tortilla chips are rising from the bottom.
Oh, God.
If you leave it alone, everything just kind of starts to rise to the top, which I wonder if it's like
a dead body.
There you go.
Fortunately, this shouldn't actually give us whistle bellies because we're using not rotten beer.
Like, imagine you just knew that you were going to go to work with diarrhea. And like, that was just your day. That was just your lot in life for the day.
I do have to go to work after this.
I've been very vocal about this in the past, but I like diarrhea. I think it gets a bad. I think it's cool. I don't even call it diarrhea. I call it liveria.
I think that a lot of colonial Americans woke up knowing that they were going to go to work, which would last 14 hours. With diarrhea.
That sounds miserable, but not as miserable as dying during childbirth.
Or slavery.
Or slavery, yeah.
I can't speak, obviously, myself, but I assume that back then, both childbirth and slavery also included a good amount of diarrhea.
That is true.
Here we go.
All right. Bottoms up.
It's interesting.
The grossest thing is the texture. It's weird to have a bunch of breadcrumbs hit your tongue.
It's starting to smell like vomit to me.
Yeah, yours is probably far worse than any of ours.
Yeah, it is. Isn't that what gluten-free life is all about? You've tricked yourself into thinking it's better.
Yeah, it doesn't. It tastes like molasses. I am concerned about the texture.
Taste, not bad. Texture, very unsettling.
My verdict is I probably will not finish this.
All right, so I've added a little bit more molasses.
It tastes about the same, but the smell is better.
Yeah, I don't want this.
Jenny, have you had more than like one sip?
No, I'm not touching it. No, it tastes like vomit.
Not the most disgusting thing we've made.
It's up there.
This is probably the grossest drink that doesn't have an egg in it. Well, that was it.
Sounds good. All right.
May we not die between now and tomorrow. And yeah, thanks everybody. This was another edition of, I don't know what we call this, but
Colonial libation.
Yeah, I was gonna call it drinks. It's the most wonderful time of the year when the whole family gathers around the warm, fiery glow of the television and watches the holiday classics in staunch silence. Here at Tea Party Tonight, we have put together the most historical coming attractions out there to bring your holiday season some educational cheer in a segment we call Historical Holiday Movies. This winter, Adam Sandler wants to remind you that Christmas isn't the only holiday. His animated One Crazy Night tells the tale of the Pope's Day riots. Every 5th of November, Adam's North End gang would fight the rich kids in the South End for the right to burn down the other's anti-Catholic float. This movie will have all of us asking, why did this happen? Critics are calling it better than Ridiculous 6. General Thomas Gage has a lot to learn about New England life. When this uptight militant Grinch is put in charge of an unruly colony, he ruins Christmas when he orders all arms to be collected. Jim Carrey is General Gage in Cannonball Fun, the Gage that stole cannons. With his new hit book, A Christmas Carol, writer Charlie Dickens just wants to have a peaceful holiday stay at the hospitable Parker House Hotel. Only one problem stands in his way, his biggest rival, an orangutan named Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Now it's hard times as snowball hijinks and monkey business threaten to keep his vacation from living up to his great expectations. This season, tune into Dickens Checks In. This goofy romp into literature and hotel health code violations is a holiday film with a twist that will have the whole family saying, "Please, sir, can I have some more?" Chevy Chase is back as Clark Griswold's great 18th century ancestor, Clarence Griswold. It's December and he can barely afford to provide his family with enough beer and mulled rum drink. His wife, Goody Griswold, doesn't help when she invites her parents to live at their estate, and surprise, Southern cousin Increase Griswold shows up with all of his belongings, including a rabid horse. When Clarence decides to complain about the new tax on tea, Increase decides to take matters into his own hands with soggy results. National Lampoon presents Taxation Vacation. Being a 10-year-old in 1765, Boston was tough enough. Add being the overlooked son of a royal governor, even tougher. When Kevin's father, Thomas Hutchinson, brings the whole family to Europe for a special trip to escape an angry mob, they only forgot one thing: Kevin! Even worse, the Sons of Liberty are trying to break down his door. It's up to Kevin and his bag of tricks to protect the Hutchinson house and uphold the royally decreed Stamp Act. In Home Alone, Lost in the Colonies. Robert Newman sees British soldiers marching to Concord, spies in every direction, and he can't see the point of life anymore. He's got the keys to the best view in the colony, the steeple of the Old North Church, and he's thinking of jumping off. Can an angel convince him that life is worth living by showing him what life would be like without him? Find out in It's a Wonderful Fife. Abigail Adams heads up to the North Pole to help her brother out during the busiest time of the year. But old Kris Kringle is going to have a hard time getting things ready when Abigail's 24-hour tea parties keep all the lady elves on an all-night spinning wheel blowout, making stuffy old Santa have to remember the ladies. Helen Mirren is Abigail Claus. John Wilkes Booth is a struggling actor, desperate for his shot at fame. Willing to do anything for validation and attention, John becomes embroiled in a viral marketing publicity stunt that leads to the death of America's longest president. But little does John know that now he has to become the president. This holiday season, John Wilkes Booth is Abraham Lincoln in The Lincoln Claus. John McClane is a simple Irish cop, on leave for the holidays with his estranged family in Boston's North End. When a band of German anarchists reveal their plot to disrupt the world's gingerbread supply, a sleepy holiday party around a rickety molasses vat becomes the non-stop action-packed thrill ride that ruins John's vacation in Die Hard, Die Wicked Hard. Little Kyle wants an AR-15 for Christmas and has absolutely no problem getting one. Coming soon, a Christmas or really any other time of the year story. And that has been Historical Holiday Movies. We'll be right back. And that is our show. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to thank our guests, Jane Kamensky and Mary Beth Norton. I want to thank all of our comedian friends. I want to thank the staff here at Revolutionary Spaces. I also want to say go to revolutionaryspaces.org to sign up for the mailing list to find out about all of the exciting things that are going to be happening in the new year. And we will be back with another episode of Tea Party Tonight in March. We will see you then.